Before we begin this incredible journey through one of World War II's most remarkable engineering achievements, take a moment to show your support for these forgotten heroes. Please hit the like button if this story amazes you. Subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of the Second World War, and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. We love connecting with our global community of history enthusiasts. The year was 1941, and across the vast training grounds of America, a revolution in military engineering was taking shape. In the sprawling camps of Louisiana, Texas, and Georgia, men who had once laid foundations for skyscrapers and bridges across peaceful rivers were now learning to perform these same tasks under the thunder of artillery and the crack of rifle fire. The United States Army Corps of Engineers faced an unprecedented challenge as America prepared to enter the Second World War. The new generation of tanks rolling off production lines weighed twice as much as their predecessors, and the existing bridge-building techniques that had served adequately in the First World War were now hopelessly inadequate. The M4 Sherman tank, weighing 30 tons, and the newer experimental heavy tanks promised to test any crossing to its limits. At Camp Swift in Texas, Lieutenant Colonel David Pergrin pushed his 291st Engineer Combat Battalion through training exercises that seemed designed to break both men and machines. Under the scorching Texas sun and through torrential rainstorms that turned the training grounds into rivers of mud, these engineers practiced assembling bridges while instructors fired live ammunition over their heads. The philosophy was simple yet revolutionary. If a man could build a bridge blindfolded in a thunderstorm with bullets whistling overhead, he could build one anywhere the war might take him. The innovation extended beyond mere training intensity. American engineers were mastering a British invention that would revolutionize warfare: the Bailey Bridge. This modular, prefabricated truss system could be assembled without heavy machinery, using only hand tools and human muscle power. Each panel weighed just over 500 pounds, light enough for 6 men to carry, yet when properly assembled, these bridges could support the weight of the heaviest Allied tanks. What distinguished American engineering training was its emphasis on redundancy and cross-training. Unlike their German counterparts, who trained specialists for specific tasks, every American combat engineer learned every aspect of bridge construction. A radio operator could assemble pontoons, a demolition expert could survey approaches, and a squad leader could calculate load distributions. This approach meant that casualties, inevitable in combat operations, would not halt construction, as they might in more rigid organizational structures. The 1139th Engineer Combat Group, formed in December 1943, exemplified this new American approach to combat engineering. From their inception, these units were designed not merely to support advancing armies, but to enable the kind of rapid movement that would characterize American operations in Europe. Their mission was ambitious: to ensure that rivers, valleys, and destroyed infrastructure would never slow the American advance for more than a few hours. As 1944 approached and the long-awaited invasion of Europe loomed, these engineers carried with them more than technical knowledge. They possessed an almost industrial confidence born from America's manufacturing might and organizational efficiency. Their equipment was standardized, their procedures were tested under the most extreme conditions, and their supply chains were backed by the full productive capacity of American industry. The stage was set for a demonstration of engineering capabilities that would leave German commanders struggling to comprehend what they were witnessing. In a modest workshop in Christchurch, England, during the darkest days of 1940, civil engineer Donald Bailey was working on a solution that would help win the war. As German bombs fell on London and the Wehrmacht swept across Europe with unprecedented speed, Bailey understood that the Allies needed more than just better tactics or more tanks. They needed the ability to move armies across destroyed landscape faster than the enemy could retreat. The Bailey Bridge represented a fundamental shift in military engineering philosophy. Previous military bridges required extensive preparation, specialized equipment, and construction times, measured in days or weeks. Bailey's innovation was elegantly simple: standardized steel panels that interlocked like a massive construction set, allowing engineers to build bridges of varying lengths and load capacities using identical components. The entire system could be transported in standard military trucks and assembled using only basic hand tools. The first operational test came in Tunisia on the night of November 26, 1942, when the 237 Field Company of the Royal Engineers constructed a Bailey Bridge over the Mejerda River near Mejez El Bab. Working in darkness to avoid German observation, the engineers discovered that Bailey's theoretical calculations translated perfectly into battlefield reality. The bridge was completed in hours rather than days, and more importantly, it could be erected entirely from one side of the river, eliminating the dangerous requirement of establishing a foothold on the far bank before beginning construction. American observers were initially skeptical of the British design, preferring their own heavy treadway bridges for most applications. However, combat experience quickly demonstrated the Bailey's versatility. When the Germans destroyed the 19 spans of the Sangro River Bridge in Italy but left 14 piers standing, British engineers used Bailey panels to construct a 1,026-foot replacement. The bridge was operational within days of the German destruction, allowing Allied forces to maintain their advance schedule. The true revelation came with the bridge's adaptability to local conditions. In the mountainous terrain of Italy, Bailey bridges were suspended across gorges that would have been impossible to span with conventional military bridges. Over the Volturno River, a single Bailey suspension bridge carried 240,000 vehicles in 8 months of continuous operation. The modular design meant that bridges could be strengthened by adding additional layers of panels or extended by connecting more sections, all without specialized equipment or lengthy construction delays. American production of Bailey bridges began in early 1942, with contracts awarded to Detroit Steel Products Company, American Elevator Company, and Commercial Shearing and Stamping Company. The licensing agreement with Britain represented more than a simple technology transfer. It was an acknowledgement that American industrial capacity could mass-produce this revolutionary design on a scale that would transform military operations. By 1943, American factories were producing Bailey panels at rates that exceeded British production by factors of 10. The implications extended beyond simple river crossings. Bailey bridges could be erected across bomb craters, connecting segments of destroyed roads. They could span railway cuts, allowing tank columns to bypass destroyed rail infrastructure. Most significantly, they could be assembled under fire, with construction teams working in shifts to maintain progress, even while under enemy observation and artillery bombardment. As American forces prepared for the invasion of Europe, they possessed not just a bridge-building system, but a tool that would render traditional defensive obstacles obsolete. The pre-dawn darkness of June 6, 1944, brought with it the largest amphibious invasion in history, and with the first waves of assault troops came American combat engineers carrying a burden that would determine the success of the entire operation. At Omaha Beach, where German machine guns commanded every approach and artillery zeroed on every yard of sand, engineers of the 5th and 6th Engineer Special Brigades faced their ultimate test. The German defensive strategy at Normandy was predicated on containing Allied forces on the beaches, using the natural and artificial obstacles to prevent the rapid movement inland that would be necessary for operational success. Rommel's Atlantic Wall included not just concrete bunkers and gun positions, but a comprehensive system of obstacles designed to channel advancing forces into killing zones. Rivers had been diverted to create swamps, bridges had been prepared for destruction, and every natural choke point had been fortified. American engineers brought to Normandy not just Bailey Bridge components, but a systematic approach to obstacle clearance that reflected their industrial training background. Working under the murderous fire from the bluffs above Omaha Beach, engineer teams used Bangalore torpedoes and demolition charges to blast gaps through the wire obstacles, creating corridors through which infantry could advance. Each gap was marked and widened systematically, transforming chaos into organized movement within hours of the initial landing. The first major bridging operation came at the Douve River, where the 237th Engineer Combat Battalion constructed a Bailey Bridge under direct observation from German positions. The construction began at first light on June 8th, with half the battalion providing security, while the other half assembled the bridge components. German artillery responded within minutes, but the engineers had prepared for this, with crews working in rotation and bridge sections pre-assembled in protected positions. The bridge was completed in 14 hours despite constant harassment, demonstrating that American engineering capabilities could overcome both enemy action and natural obstacles. The success at the Douve River established a pattern that would be repeated across Normandy and beyond. American engineers developed techniques for rapid bridge reconnaissance, with advanced teams identifying optimal crossing sites while combat was still ongoing. They perfected the art of concurrent operations, with some teams clearing approaches while others assembled bridge components, and still others prepared defensive positions to protect the completed structures. This parallel approach reduced construction times from days to hours, maintaining the momentum of advancing armored columns. By July 1944, the engineering accomplishments in Normandy had fundamentally altered German defensive calculations. The Wehrmacht had based their defensive plans on the assumption that destroying bridges and creating obstacles would delay Allied advances by days or weeks, providing time to reposition reserves and establish new defensive lines. Instead, American engineers were typically restoring mobility within hours, forcing German commanders to fight continuous delaying actions without the breathing space their doctrine required. The breakout from Normandy in late July demonstrated the full potential of American engineering capabilities. Operation Cobra's success depended not just on the initial breakthrough, but on the ability to exploit that breakthrough faster than German forces could respond. American combat engineers, working sometimes within sight of retreating German forces, maintained the bridges and roads that allowed Patton's Third Army to race across France at speeds that left German commanders unable to establish coherent defensive lines. The foundation of victory had been laid on the beaches of Normandy, where engineers proved that no obstacle was permanent when American ingenuity and determination were applied. The autumn of 1944 found American armies racing across France with a speed that stunned both friend and enemy, and at the spearhead of this advance were combat engineers who had turned bridge building into an art form. The Third Army alone, in its headlong rush toward the German border, required the construction of 53 treadway bridges totaling over 20,000 feet, while engineers simultaneously built almost 27,000 feet of fixed Bailey bridging to maintain supply lines. General George Patton's philosophy of continuous movement placed enormous pressure on his engineering units, but the 1139th Engineer Combat Group and its subordinate battalions had developed systems that could match even Patton's ambitious pace. Their approach was methodical, despite the apparent chaos of rapid advance. Reconnaissance teams would identify crossing sites days ahead of the main force. Supply columns would pre-position bridging materials at multiple locations, and construction crews would begin work before the arrival of the troops they were meant to support. The crossing of the Moselle River in September 1944 demonstrated the sophistication of American engineering operations. The 1139th Engineer Combat Group constructed 4 separate bridges at different crossing points within a 24-hour period, each designed to handle different types of traffic. Heavy tank bridges carried armored spearheads, Medium-capacity bridges handled supply trucks, and light bridges accommodated infantry and reconnaissance units. This parallel approach meant that even if German forces managed to destroy one crossing point, the advance could continue using alternative routes. German defensive doctrine struggled to adapt to American engineering capabilities. Wehrmacht commanders had been trained to think in terms of river lines as natural defensive barriers that would require weeks of preparation to cross. Instead, they found American forces crossing major rivers within hours of reaching them, often before German forces had time to organize coherent defensive positions on the far shore. Field reports from German units repeatedly expressed bewilderment at American bridge-building speed, with some commanders initially refusing to believe their own observers' reports. The systematic nature of American operations extended to innovation under pressure. When standard bridging techniques proved inadequate for specific situations, American engineers developed field modifications that became standard practice. At one crossing site, engineers discovered that German demolitions had created an underwater crater that prevented standard pontoon placement. Within hours, they had improvised a solution using Bailey panels as cribbing to create stable foundations in the irregular riverbed. Such adaptations were immediately shared with other units, creating a learning organization that improved its effectiveness with each operation. By December 1944, as American forces approached the German border, the cumulative effect of engineering excellence had fundamentally altered the strategic situation. The 1139th Engineer Combat Group alone had constructed 119 tactical bridges, 39 of which were over 200 feet in length. Their masterpiece was a floating bridge of 1,896 feet across a major river, the longest tactical bridge built in the European theater. These statistics represented more than technical achievement. They demonstrated that American forces had solved the fundamental problem of modern warfare: how to maintain momentum in the face of defensive obstacles. The approaching winter and the looming obstacle of the Rhine River promised even greater challenges, but American engineers faced these prospects with confidence, born from months of successful operations. They had proven that rivers, valleys, and destroyed infrastructure need not halt advancing armies. The techniques perfected in France would soon be tested against Germany's greatest natural defensive barrier, where the outcome would determine not just the success of individual operations, but the fate of the Third Reich itself. The Rhine River in early 1945 represented more than a geographic obstacle. It was the Third Reich's final natural defense line, a barrier that German commanders believed would buy precious time to organize last-ditch resistance. Flowing northward for over 800 miles from Switzerland to the North Sea, the Rhine varied in width from 300 to over 1,000 feet, with currents that could reach 8 miles per hour during spring floods. German engineers had spent months preparing every bridge for destruction, creating what they considered an impenetrable water barrier. American intelligence had identified over 40 major crossing points along the Rhine, each presenting unique engineering challenges. The river's width required longer bridges than most combat engineers had previously constructed, while the current demanded anchoring systems far more robust than those used on smaller rivers. The gravelly bottom composition made standard anchoring techniques unreliable, requiring innovative solutions that would have to be developed under combat conditions. The surprise capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen on March 7, 1945, by elements of the 9th Armored Division created the first opportunity for American engineers to demonstrate their capabilities against Germany's primary defensive barrier. The bridge, originally built for railroad traffic, had been damaged by German demolition attempts but remained structurally sound enough to support light traffic. However, its capacity was insufficient for the massive flow of men and equipment required to exploit the breakthrough. Lieutenant Colonel David Pergrin's 291st Engineer Combat Battalion received orders to construct an M2 steel treadway bridge 400 meters downstream from the captured railroad bridge. Beginning construction at 8:30 a.m. on March 9th, they faced immediate German artillery fire that would continue throughout the operation. The enemy response was ferocious, with concentrated barrages that destroyed 19 pontoon floats in a single attack and caused 35 casualties, including 17 killed or wounded in one devastating salvo. The construction proceeded despite the carnage, demonstrating the training and determination that characterized American combat engineers. Working in shifts to maintain continuous progress, engineers assembled bridge sections under fire, while their comrades provided covering fire from defensive positions. The modular design of American bridging equipment proved crucial, as destroyed sections could be quickly replaced without halting overall construction. Each pontoon float was individually anchored and could function independently, so losing several floats to enemy action did not compromise the entire bridge. At 5:10 p.m. on March 10th, barely 36 hours after beginning construction, the first tactical bridge across the Rhine was completed. This achievement represented more than engineering excellence. It demonstrated that American forces had overcome the primary obstacle protecting the German homeland. The bridge could handle continuous traffic of fully loaded Sherman tanks and supply trucks, transforming the narrow beachhead at Remagen into a major crossing point capable of supporting entire divisions. German commanders received reports of the completed bridge with disbelief. Their own engineer units, operating under ideal conditions, required a minimum of 48 to 72 hours to construct comparable spans. Most German bridging operations in 1945 took 5 days or more, when they could be completed at all, given the chronic shortages of materials and specialized equipment. The American achievement at Remagen forced a complete recalculation of German defensive timelines and revealed the inadequacy of their assumptions about Allied engineering capabilities. While the drama at Remagen captured headlines and German attention, General George Patton was planning an operation that would demonstrate American engineering capabilities on an even more impressive scale. On the evening of March 22, 1945, Patton summoned his engineering commanders to Third Army headquarters and delivered characteristically blunt orders. His forces would cross the Rhine at Oppenheim before dawn, and they would do so without the elaborate preparations that characterized Montgomery's planned Operation Plunder. The engineering challenge was staggering in its scope and timeline. Patton's assault units had 6 hours' notice, requiring combat engineers to organize and execute a major river crossing operation with virtually no advance preparation. The crossing site at Oppenheim presented a river width of over 400 meters, with spring currents running at nearly 10 miles per hour. Worse, German forces on the eastern bank were fully alert and positioned to contest any crossing attempt. Companies E and C of the 17th Armored Engineer Battalion, part of the 2nd Armored Division, received the mission with characteristic American confidence. Their commander, Captain James E. McAdams, had only hours to conduct aerial reconnaissance of the crossing site and coordinate with the assault infantry who would secure the far shore. The complexity of the operation required precise timing. Assault boats had to land infantry before German forces could react. Ferries had to begin operating before enemy artillery could interdict the crossing, and bridge construction had to commence before German reserves could counterattack. The operation began at 10:30 p.m. on March 22nd with the launch of assault boats carrying the 5th Infantry Division across the dark waters of the Rhine. By midnight, American infantry was securing landing sites on the eastern bank, while combat engineers began ferrying heavy equipment across on hastily constructed rafts. The German response was immediate and violent, with artillery fire falling among the engineers as they worked to assemble their M2 treadway bridge under the cover of artificial moonlight provided by powerful searchlights. Bridge construction commenced at 9:45 a.m. on March 23rd, despite continuing enemy fire that caused 20 casualties before the operation was complete. The 17th Armored Engineer Battalion worked with methodical efficiency that seemed impossible under such conditions, with each team knowing their exact role and executing it despite the chaos around them. Over 152 feet of M2 treadway and 93 pneumatic floats were positioned and connected in just 6 hours and 15 minutes, establishing a new record for bridge construction under combat conditions. At 4 p.m. on March 23rd, the first truck crossed the completed floating pontoon bridge, marking the successful completion of an engineering feat that German commanders had considered impossible. The bridge could handle continuous heavy traffic, transforming Patton's surprise crossing into a major operational breakthrough. German staff officers, trained to calculate river crossing operations in terms of weeks, found themselves facing American forces that had crossed the Rhine in less than 18 hours from initial conception to completed bridge. The strategic implications were immediately apparent. While Montgomery's carefully planned Operation Plunder was still in its preliminary stages, Patton's Third Army was pouring across the Rhine with the full momentum of their characteristic advance. German reserves, positioned to counter Montgomery's expected assault, found themselves facing an entirely different threat from an unexpected direction. The speed of American engineering operations had not just crossed a river, it had outmaneuvered the entire German defensive strategy. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring ordered the Luftwaffe to destroy the Oppenheim Bridge, committing 42 sorties that dropped over 60 tons of bombs. The bridge suffered only minor damage, repaired within 2 hours. Even when German aircraft managed to destroy bridge sections, American engineers simply floated replacement sections into position. The 994th Engineer Treadway Bridge Company's war diary noted with characteristic American understatement, bridge damaged by enemy action 1430 hours, repairs complete 1615 hours, traffic resumed. By late March 1945, American combat engineers had transformed the strategic landscape of Western Europe through achievements that defied conventional military wisdom. The 1,159th Engineer Combat Group had constructed 6 major bridges across the Rhine in 5 days, each capable of handling over 1,000 vehicles daily. The entire 9th Army, comprising over 300,000 men with their complete equipment, crossed this supposedly impregnable barrier in 72 hours. The systematic superiority of American engineering extended far beyond simple construction speed. American bridges featured integrated lighting systems powered by portable generators, enabling full-speed night traffic, while German bridges, when they could be built at all, required vehicles to cross slowly in darkness. Anti-mine booms were installed upstream of American bridges, deflecting floating explosives that German forces hoped would destroy the crossings. Communication systems linked both banks of every American bridge, coordinating traffic flow and enabling immediate response to enemy action. German staff officers, trained in methodical approaches that measured operations in weeks rather than hours, proved unable to adapt their planning to American operational tempo. General Günther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff of the German Western Command, later admitted the fundamental miscalculation. "We based our calculations on our own crossing times. The Americans crossed in 1/5 the time we considered physically possible." This admission revealed more than tactical surprise. It demonstrated that American engineering had achieved capabilities that transcended existing military doctrine. The individual combat engineer had evolved into something unprecedented in military history. Captain James Morrison of the 146th Engineer Combat Battalion described the routine that had developed. "We'd get word that a bridge was blown. By the time our reconnaissance arrived, the assault boats were already launching. While infantry secured the far shore, we'd be assembling the bridge. The whole thing became automatic. My men could build a 200-foot treadway in their sleep, and sometimes nearly did. This level of proficiency represented years of training distilled into reflexive competence. The broader implications extended beyond tactical success. American engineering units had solved the fundamental problem that had plagued military operations throughout history: how to maintain offensive momentum in the face of natural and artificial obstacles. Rivers, valleys, destroyed infrastructure, and deliberate enemy demolitions no longer represented significant delays to American operations. The strategic initiative, once lost to defensive preparation, had been permanently returned to offensive forces. The technological foundation of this revolution rested on American industrial capacity and organizational methods. Standardized components meant that bridges could be constructed using identical procedures regardless of local conditions. Mass production ensured that destroyed equipment could be immediately replaced from abundant stocks. Most importantly, systematic training had created engineers who could adapt to any situation without requiring specialized equipment or lengthy preparation. The German response revealed the magnitude of American achievement. Wehrmacht demolition teams continued destroying bridges, hoping to delay American advances, but these efforts had become essentially meaningless. American engineers had developed such proficiency that bridge destruction often merely provided them with an opportunity to demonstrate their capabilities. The psychological effect on German forces was devastating as they witnessed their primary defensive strategy rendered obsolete by American engineering excellence. As April 1945 arrived, American forces faced no significant water obstacles in their advance toward the heart of Germany. The engineering revolution that had begun in the training camps of Texas and Louisiana had reached its culmination in the successful crossing of Europe's greatest river barrier. The foundation of victory had been laid not just by tanks and aircraft, but by combat engineers who had redefined the possible. The final weeks of the European War in April and May 1945 witnessed American engineering capabilities reach their full potential, as combat engineer units advanced across Germany with an efficiency that left both Allied and enemy observers struggling to comprehend the scale of their achievement. The bridges they had built across the Rhine continued to function flawlessly, carrying the massive logistical requirements of armies advancing on multiple fronts, while simultaneously supporting the millions of displaced persons, prisoners of war, and refugees flowing in the opposite direction. The 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, which had earned lasting fame for their work at Remagen, continued to exemplify American engineering excellence as they advanced toward the Danube River. During their entire European campaign, they constructed 23 timber bridges, 44 Bailey bridges, and 7 treadway bridges, with 11 of these built under direct enemy fire. These statistics represented more than engineering accomplishment. They demonstrated the complete transformation of military operations that American engineers had achieved. As Allied forces converged on Berlin, the strategic impact of engineering excellence became fully apparent. German forces, unable to use rivers as defensive barriers and incapable of delaying Allied advances through infrastructure destruction, found themselves fighting a series of hopeless rearguard actions. The Wehrmacht's doctrine of trading space for time had been rendered obsolete by American engineers who could restore mobility faster than German forces could create obstacles. The final bridge-building operation of the European War came at the Danube River, where the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, working alongside the 324th Engineer Combat Battalion, constructed their last bridge under fire on April 27, 1945. The operation proceeded with the methodical efficiency that had characterized American engineering throughout the campaign, completed in hours rather than the days that German doctrine considered normal. By this point, American engineering capabilities had become so routine that spectacular achievements were noted in unit diaries with the same matter-of-fact language used to describe supply deliveries. The surrender of German forces on May 8, 1945, found American combat engineers engaged in their largest construction project, rebuilding the infrastructure of a devastated continent. The same units that had built bridges under fire now turned to the massive task of restoring transportation networks, constructing temporary housing for millions of displaced persons, and creating the logistical infrastructure needed to support occupation forces. Their transition from combat to reconstruction operations demonstrated the versatility that had always characterized American engineering units. The broader legacy of American combat engineers extended far beyond military operations. The Bailey Bridge system, perfected in combat operations, would find peacetime applications in disaster relief, remote area development, and emergency infrastructure projects worldwide. The organizational techniques developed for rapid bridge construction would influence civilian construction practices for decades. Most importantly, the concept of standardized modular construction systems would become fundamental to post-war industrial development. The individual combat engineers who had made these achievements possible returned to civilian life carrying skills and confidence that would shape American society for generations. Men who had built bridges under artillery fire found civilian construction challenges manageable by comparison. Their experience in rapid problem-solving, working under pressure, and adapting to changing conditions proved invaluable in the post-war economic boom that transformed America. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, reflecting on the war in 1947, captured the strategic significance of engineering excellence. Bailey Bridging made an immense contribution towards ending World War II. As far as my own operations were concerned, with the 8th Army in Italy and with the 21 Army Group in Northwest Europe, I could never have maintained the speed and tempo of forward movement without large supplies of Bailey Bridging. This acknowledgement from one of the war's most demanding commanders testified to the revolutionary impact of American engineering capabilities. The war had demonstrated that victory in modern conflict required more than superior weapons or tactical brilliance. It required the ability to maintain momentum across any terrain, overcome any obstacle, and adapt to any challenge with speed that left enemies unable to respond effectively. American combat engineers had proven that such capabilities were achievable through superior training, innovative equipment, and the systematic application of industrial methods to military problems. Their legacy would endure long after the bridges they built had been replaced by permanent peacetime structures, serving as a testament to what could be accomplished when American ingenuity and determination were applied to seemingly impossible challenges. The story of American combat engineers in World War II represents more than a military achievement. It embodies the transformation of impossibility into routine through dedication, innovation, and unwavering determination. From the training grounds of Texas to the great rivers of Europe, these men proved that no obstacle was permanent when confronted by American ingenuity and resolve. The bridges they built carried more than tanks and supplies. They carried the hopes of free nations and the promise of liberation for millions living under tyranny. Their legacy lives on not only in the techniques they perfected and the victories they enabled, but in the fundamental principle they demonstrated, that with proper preparation, innovative thinking, and courageous execution, even the greatest challenges can be overcome. Today, as we face our own obstacles and challenges, we can draw inspiration from these forgotten heroes who showed the world that when Americans set their minds to a task, no river is too wide, no current too strong, and no enemy fire too intense to prevent them from building the bridges that lead to victory. Their story reminds us that behind every great military triumph stand countless individuals whose skill, bravery, and dedication make the impossible possible. The combat engineers of World War II earned their place among the greatest heroes of that conflict, not through grand gestures or famous battles, but through the quiet competence that turned engineering marvels into daily routine and transformed the course of history one bridge at a time.